Rosenbaum. I was born December the 15th, 1922 in Beuthen, Oberschlesien, Germany.
And what is your husband's name?
My husband's name is Ernest Reich.
And what are your...
He was born September the 17th, 1919 in Oebischheim, Germany.
What is your daughter's names? The names of your daughters? Your children, what are their names?
I have 3 daughters, Jeanette, Linda, and Renee. They're all married.
Today is February 24th, 1997. The survivor is Frida Reich, R-E-I-C-H, maiden name Rosenbaum, R-O-S-E-N-B-A-U-M. The interviewer is Susan Rosenblum, R-O-S-E-N-B-L-U-M. We are in Lauderdale Lakes, Florida, the United States of America. The language is English, and this is tape 1. Today is February 24th, 1997. The survivor is Frida Reich, R-E-I-C-H, maiden name Rosenbaum, R-O-S-E-N-B-A-U-M. I'm Susan Rosenblum, R-O-S-E-N-B-L-U-M. We are in Lauderdale Lakes, Florida, the United States of America, and the language is English. Would you tell us your name, please?
My name is Frida Reich. My maiden name was Rosenbaum.
Would you spell your last name for us, please?
R-E-I-C-H.
Thank you.
And R-O-S-E-N-B-A-U-M.
Thank you. Where were you born?
I was born in Beuthen, Oberschlesien, Germany.
And when were you born?
I was born on December the 15th, 1922.
How old are you today?
74.
Thank you. What was your father's name?
My father's name was Michael Rosenbaum.
And your mother?
And my mother's name was Lena Rosenbaum. Her maiden name was Wirklich.
Thank you. Did you have brothers or sisters?
I had one brother. He was the nearest one to me. His name was Gabriel, and he was born December the 19th, 1925.
And
my sister Brigitte was born in Berlin on September the 15th, 1927. My sister Elizabeth was born in Berlin July the 16th, 1929. And my youngest sister Marley was born in Berlin November the 28th, 1937.
Thank you. When did your family move to Berlin?
We moved to Berlin after I was a little more than a year old. And my sisters and brothers were all born there already.
Why did your family move to Berlin?
Well, you know, it was a big city and was easier for someone to work and make a living for a family.
What did your father do?
He worked in a men's clothing manufacturer.
What did he do there?
He was working there for many years. I don't really know, various things, I suppose.
Did your mother work?
My mother did not work. She had 5 children.
Could you describe your home for me? What did it look like?
We had a very nice home. We lived not in a Jewish section. The building was a mixed building. We had some Jewish people and Christians. As a matter of fact, right underneath us, there was an SS man living. But he was not a bad man. If you would meet him on the stairway and there was no one else around, he always talked, asked for my parents, my sisters and brothers, would sometimes hand me a few bananas to give to my little baby sister. But when anybody was on the stairs, he did not acknowledge, even knowing who we were.
Do you remember his name?
No.
Do you remember your address?
Yes. Just die Straße 8.
Thank you.
Berlin, Germany.
How large was your home?
We had 3 bedrooms, and you know, in Europe, your main place was the kitchen, which was usually very large, and that's where it was replaced a living room here in everything else, a dining room, a living room. That was the way that we lived there.
What languages were spoken in your home?
In my home, we only spoke German. My parents were afraid if they spoke too much Yiddish to us, that when we went to school, we would mix it up with German, and the children would laugh at us and tell us we don't speak correct. So they refused to let us speak, even hear the Yiddish.
Where were your parents born?
My parents were born in Poland. My father in Warsaw, Poland, and my mother in Dynów, Galician, Poland.
Did your parents and your family attend synagogue?
Yes, they did.
Do you remember the name of the synagogue?
No, it was, it was a small synagogue that most of the Polish Jews attended, and we children did not like going there. We would go to a Reform temple that was very large and very modern. But we went too, because it became like a hangout for all the youth, We all ended up there.
How often did your parents attend synagogue?
Well, my father was not as religious as my mother, but he did it to please her, because my grandmother lived with us, and she was a rabbi's daughter, and she was very, very Orthodox, very Orthodox. So a lot of things in our house were very Orthodox to please my grandmother.
What kind of things were Orthodox in your home?
We kept a strictly kosher home, and like I say, we observed all holidays, Shabbos, and so on. I mean, whatever there was to it, it was observed in the house.
What was Pesach like in your home?
Well, Pesach was a big, big, big thing.
Tell me.
You had barrels that were stored in the basement of the building where we had bins, each of the families, and they would be bought up, and everything was taken out of the closets and kashed, and all the Pesach sober dishes came out and were washed, and everybody in the family had to help because it was a tremendous, tremendous big job.
Do you remember special foods that your mother would prepare for Passover?
She was an excellent cook. She made almost everything. She was a fabulous cook. When there were parties to be made between the friends, it was usually my mother that was elected to make the party because she was a better cook than anybody.
Do you remember special foods that she prepared for Shabbat or for Passover?
Well, on Shabbos, it was a tradition when you made for Friday night gefilte fish, it was eaten for breakfast Shabbos morning because we didn't make nothing hot. So the fish was eaten cold. So that's what we had almost every Shabbos morning. We ate fish, either a piece of carp or gefilte fish or white fish, but it was mostly, that's what was made for Shabbos. And then, of course, there was the lokshen soup and the chicken and the traditional Jewish Shabbos meal.
What schools did you attend?
I went to the 154th public school in Germany, and when I went through that, I started going to a seminar, which was a Jewish seminar, and of course the Nazis threw us out there very quickly, saying they needed the building for the soldiers. And there was a Jewish children's home that had lots of Jewish children in the neighborhood, And they were running out of teachers because every teacher that was able to get out of the country left. They were only allowed to hire Jewish teachers. And they asked us, they would give us some classrooms to continue our studies, but we must give up part of our time and help teach the children. Which there were not that many volunteers in the seminar, but we were, I would say, 10, 12 of us.
What were you studying at the seminar?
I wanted to be a math teacher. I was always excellent in math. My nickname in school, even after I came to this country, if I met someone that couldn't remember my name, they would say, "Oh, you were the math master." That was my nickname. Of course, translated from German. In German, it was der Rechenmeister. That's what they called me.
While you were going to school, did you experience any anti-Semitism?
There was a lot of, don't forget, it wasn't only the children that became little by little Nazis. It was a lot of teachers too. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. You never got a fair report card. But you know, it didn't matter. We Jewish children learned to deal with it. We learned to ignore it, the report card. It didn't mean anything to us.
Did you personally experience any anti-Semitism from the other children in the school?
Yes, there were children that would threaten you. They knew I was good in math. When we would have a math test, they would say to me, "You better slip me all the answers correctly. Otherwise, I'm going to send my brothers. They're all in the Nazi party. They're going to kill your family." You were being threatened constantly.
Did you give them the answers?
Well, you learned, you know, you lived with it. You learned to live with it. Not that it was pleasant, but you had no other choice.
Do you recall the names of any of your friends from your childhood?
Oh yes, I have a lot of friends. I have one friend who I still am in touch with. We went to school together, and she lives in Queens, New York. She lost all her family like me. She spent the war years in England. And then after the war, she found out she lost all her family.
And what is her name?
Her name is Tosca. Her name was Sussman when she was single, and she married one of the boys that remained in Germany in all the camps. And when he was brought by a brother that was in England to England, and he ran into her, he promised when he comes to America, he would send for her and marry her, and he did. And his name was Kempler, Irving Kempler.
Did you belong to any organizations?
We all belong to Zionist organizations.
Tell me about that.
That was our way of life, because as Jewish children, there was nowhere else for us to go but belonging to a Zionist organization where we had regular meetings. As a matter of fact, our group leader's name was Molly, and when my mother had her last baby, I begged her. She wanted to name her Margaret, and I was so crazy about that group leader, I asked her to name my sister Molly, and she did.
What kind of things did you do when your group would meet?
All kinds. She educated us. She even educated us, let's say, in things that your parents didn't tell you.
Like what?
You know, about sex and so on and so forth. She really tried very hard for us to learn all the things that she knew we would not learn at home.
Was your group made up of boys and girls? Or just girls?
Just girls. But we got together with the boys too occasionally. They had their own group, and certain things we did together. The majority of the boys, I remember, all ended up going to Israel, into the kibbutzim.
As Hitler rose to power, how did your life begin to change?
It changed, because we were not as free. There was a place on the outskirts of Berlin. It was a sports field. It was called Grunewald. And automatically every Sunday, I think every Jewish youth living in Berlin or in the area ended up there. Because, like I said, we had to segregate ourselves. We could not mingle, and we were always hoping that nobody came to riot or to do anything there. And like I said, we hanged out there every single Sunday. I remember going. I was in some of the relay matches, certain things. We tried to participate in everything.
Was there ever a problem on a Sunday while you were there?
No, not when I was there. I'm sure there were, but I've never attended any of them.
How was your father's job affected during those years? Your father's job, was he able to keep his job?
Well, he worked in a Jewish firm, and there was no problem. Don't forget, he was taken away in 1938. So, being they had shipped him over the border, and he ended up in a camp called Spongin, where all the Polish Jews were sent at the time.
Why did they take him away?
Because the Polish government came out with a law saying that they will not give the Polish people born in Poland any more passports and keep renewing them if they never come to Poland. So he gave them an ultimatum, a date, that if they don't come to Poland at such and such a date, he will refuse to extend their passports. And Hitler thought, I have enough of my own Jews. He decided to pick up every Polish Jew. In the smaller cities, I understand, he picked up women and children and even dragged out people from hospitals. But Berlin had too many Polish Jews. They took only men and boys 15 or over.
Just to go back for a moment, did your brother have a bar mitzvah?
He had a bar mitzvah while my father was in Spongin.
Do you remember his bar mitzvah?
Well, it was very simple. We couldn't afford much, We went to shul, and I don't think there was anything done otherwise than that he had his bar mitzvah in shul, and all his immediate family attended. And it was sad because my father had 4 girls and 1 boy, and that was his kaddish, and he would have loved to be at the bar mitzvah, and he was in that camp at the time.
How did your family support itself after your father had been taken?
Well, that was another hard thing. My mother took in a boarder who had money and paid whatever else. I took my little sister along to the children's home I worked in, and they paid me. And because my mother was taken very often, they called it a forced labor. They would come and pick her up with a truck when she tried to claim that she has an infant child. They told her, you have a girl, she's 15, she can take care of her. So, it was said that man that lived in our house was a very, very young man. My mother was a mother of 5 children, and my brother had a set of twins that were very close friends that ended up in the same camp as my father did. My father, of course, was very excited when he saw them. He said, how's my family? He said, oh, your family's fine, but there's a man living there. The next thing I knew, that one day a man came to the school where I went to, and he handed me a letter from my father. My father told me that I should take a post office box so he can write to me privately. Of course, I was the type of child I told my mother. So my mother said, all right, we'll take a post box. Let's see what it's all about. And my father sent me a long letter that I should have a talk with my mother, that they had 5 children together. You know, children, all they said is there's a man living there. They didn't say what, where, when. And my father right away jumped to conclusions.
What was the name of the children's home that you worked at? Do you remember?
It was called Jüdisches Kinderheim, and it was on Fährberliner Straße 92. And we were very lucky. In the kitchen, we had 2 Christian women working. One was a young woman whose husband actually was part of the Nazi party. And many times when there were riots being made in the neighborhood, those 2 women would put on swastikas and sit themselves in front of the school and let no Nazi enter. They were very good to us.
Do you remember their names?
One, her name was Frickman. As a matter of fact, there was a Jewish couple where he was the custodian of the school, and she helped in the kitchen. And when they took him away and killed him in one of the camps, that woman, Mrs. Frickman, made papers for the Jewish woman with her name. But still, I remember when I met her here after the war, she said she was afraid to go on a train, so she walked from Berlin with her little 3-year-old into Holland. There she gave the child to the nuns to take care of it. They gave her to a big family that put a cross on her, and I still correspond with that child. She always writes to me.
Did your family, before your father was taken, make any attempts to leave Germany? Did your family try to leave Germany before your father was taken away?
Well, you know, my mother, coming from Poland, where things anti-Semitism was always very, very big, felt very secure in Germany. We had a lot of chances. You see, when you were a large family like us, they wanted to send you to Australia and give you a piece of land because they needed people to work the land. She said to them, all my children are city children, they would die on the land. And we wouldn't have died there. We would have survived.
Do you remember Kristallnacht?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, my father was gone already, and my mother gave me strict orders not to go out. But, you know, being young and a child, I wanted to see what's going on, and I did run out. But I came back scared like anything because it was just unbelievable. They killed Jewish people in the streets, slaughtered them like cattle. It was a horrible sight.
Did you see this?
I did see that.
How were these people killed?
They just bayoneted them, whatever they were able to do. They were brutal. The Germans, you know, for an intelligent nation that was, before the war, a very highly intelligent race, they became barbarians. They were just unbelievable.
What else did you see on Kristallnacht?
Well, I ran right back up to my apartment. I was scared. Of course, anybody seeing me did not know I was a Jewish child. I mean, it wasn't written all over me that I was a Jew.
During the time that your father was in the camp, he was able to correspond with you?
Yes, we did. And you know, being I had a passport and my mother had a passport and my grandmother has a passport, don't forget, it wasn't just a camp, it was more what you would call a ghetto. They took a city and they put a gate around it, so to say, and you couldn't get in or out. But if you had money, you were able to rent a place to sleep, and you were able to buy your own food. There were stores. So being each of us were able to send him $10 every month, they would enter it in our passport. If I would show you my Polish passport that I still have, in the back of it, it says when I mailed it to him. And we wrote to the family in America, and they sent him money too. But of course, like he told us later on, when he came back, he felt guilty renting a room and sleeping in it alone with people sleeping out in the street. So he took into that room as many as they were able to lay down and sleep there.
How long did your father remain there?
He went there around in the early part of October 38, and he came back in May 39 to take us back to Poland. That was the understanding. There was an agreement made with the Polish government that the German government must let everyone out with their belongings. That there was enough poor Polish Jews in Poland without adding more. And you know, you needed certain papers. Of course, you did them for money, that they made them up, that this you owned as of such and such a date, because if you acquired it recently, it was not called yours. You had to own it for a number of years.
When was your family going to leave Germany?
Well, then my father decided that he's going to go ahead, figuring he will secure quarters for them in Warsaw, so when they would come, a large family, he knew he had a mother there and he had sisters there, but he felt who could take in a family of so many children. After all, that time I was included in that trip too. I was supposed to go with them. He bought for all of us train tickets. We had them all. And then one day the Germans came to see if we left, and they picked up my mother and my sisters and my brother, and I was supposed to go too, but they didn't want my grandmother. They said she's not on their list.
We're going to take a tape break now. Today is February 24th, 1997. The survivor is Frida Reich, and this is tape 2. You were telling us about the day that your family...
They came, a few Nazis, to take us all and ship us over to Poland, because we were supposed to leave, actually. But when it came to my grandmother, they said that they do not have her name on the list and they can take her. My mother went a little bit hysterical. She kept threatening she's going to tie herself to a piece of furniture. She's not leaving. She was the most devoted mother, daughter, no matter what you could say. She was very, very dedicated to her family, and especially her old mother. Finally, They were very young guys, and they didn't know what to do. And after a while, they said, you know what, your daughter, she's 16 years old. I'm sure she has her own papers. We're going to say she was not in the house when we came for you. We're going to leave her with your mother. So my mother was satisfied. She kept telling me, the minute I get my grandmother off and put her on a boat to America, I'm to come on the train and meet them in Warsaw. And that's how we remained.
When did they leave Germany? Your mother and your sisters, your brother?
It was sometime in May,
What year?
39.
After your mother and the rest of your family left, where did you and your grandmother remain?
We remained in that apartment because I said to my grandmother, you know, for Jews to rent a place is very difficult. And as long as the landlord don't tell us we must go, we will remain there. And you know, we had in the basement, there was cellars that when they had an air raid, they would all go in. And I remember the first time the air raid occurred, I was afraid to go in. I figured maybe the Christian people wouldn't let us in. But they rang our bell and made us come down and go in too. Then I waited. It wasn't that long of a time. My father, when he had come back, had managed to see the American consulate, and when he couldn't do anything for us, being we were a family of 7 people, he tried to convince the consulate that he should let his mother-in-law go to America, to her children here, in order that he wouldn't have the burden of having to support a wife and 5 children in a country he had not been since a young boy. He felt that the children of hers should take care of her in America, and the consulate agreed and gave him that she should come to the doctor to get her visa to enter the United States.
So she had children who were already in America?
Oh yes, they came here 20 years prior. Like I told you, my father was 4 years old. That means they must have come here in the early 1900s.
So you took your grandmother to a doctor.
So I took the grandmother to the council, but I instructed her a little bit. I said to her, now remember, this letter has only your name on it. It does not permit me to enter the consulate. The American consulate, in order to get a number just to go to an information desk, you had to get it 6 months in advance. So I said to her, now you can't walk without me, you can't stand without me, you cannot undress without me or dress. When you have to sign your name, you start shaking your hand, so I have to lead you. You must make sure that they let me in all the way till we go to the consulate. And I was smart enough to realize that a clerk could never do anything for me, and if they would know that I'm up to something, they would throw me out. I never opened my mouth, or less to help her. Otherwise, I kept quiet till 5 minutes before you get your visa. I knew they would let you go for 5 minutes to see the consulate themselves. When I got in there, of course, I talked a blue streak. I kept explaining him that my family was taken and deported to Poland already. First of all, I said my grandmother is dependent on me and I don't think would go without me. But even if she would, you would leave me here in Germany to die by myself, because what would happen to me? He explained me. He said, my child, I want to tell you something. The papers that you have with your parents are no good for you, because you are a minor, and the people that requested to make you enter the United States might not be willing to be responsible for you till you're of age. So forget about it. So I told him when I was about 12 years old, in a crazy moment, I sent a letter to my relatives in America, and I begged them to take me out of Germany. My aunt at the time had a appointment with an eye doctor, and she showed it to him, and the eye doctor said, I want to sponsor her, and he sent me papers.
What was his name? Do you remember?
I have it on the paper. It's similar to Auerbach, but a little different. I've seen it this morning only, you know, on one of the letters the children wrote. He asked me where the papers are, and I told him they're here at the consulate. He called a clerk, and the clerk took maybe 10 minutes at the most and found them. He said the papers were very good. He handed me a big form and told me to fill it out on both sides and mail it in to him. Well, I knew the way things were, and I felt if I would mail them in, possibilities were no one would look at them really. So I decided when I walked out the consulate's office, there was a clerk sitting at a desk who watched everybody go near that door. He saw me come out from there with that paper, so when I told him the consulate gave me this, asked me to fill it out and send it back in, he did not hesitate. He got off his chair, let me sit on his desk, and I filled out the forms and sent it right back in. Then I said to my grandmother, you know today is Yom Kippur, because once we walk out of this place to go to eat someplace, we have no way of coming back in. We have no more papers to give us entry here, which means we have to remain. And we remained sitting there. There were no more people left. The clerks, little by little, started to go home. And it was about 4:30 when the consulate came out of his office and saw us sit there. He said, now what's this? I said, well, we'll be here in the morning. If we'll be conscious, I said, I wouldn't guarantee because we haven't eaten all day, but we'll be here. He gave a big, big grin, and thinking back, I can't believe it till today. He called me in, and he gave me a paper a few weeks later to come back to the doctor and get my visa too.
What was your grandmother's name?
My grandmother's name was Rivka Wiblish.
So you went home at that point.
We went home at that point. Then there was lots of things to do because the Germans had lots of rules and regulations. You needed a lot of papers. You needed a lot of things in order to cross the border to get out of Germany. And I never dragged my grandmother anywhere. She was an old lady, a really worn-out lady, and I just felt that I have to do everything on my own. But most places, they would say to me, who's your guardian? I would say, I have no guardian. Sometimes I was lucky and they gave me what I needed, but more than I was lucky, I was not lucky. Then I had this man living in my house that I hid. My father had sent him, he had met him in the camp. And he was good at times and he was bad at times because he had his own problems and he took advantage of us. But in the meantime, he got me somebody that he told me would do this all for me for money.
Do you remember this man's name?
Yes, his name was Lehrer. L-E-H-L-E-R. R-E-L. I have it on a postcard that I was trying to write him. As a matter of fact, I left him in the apartment when I left. I told him when we left was December the 6th, and I told him I paid the rent till the 31st of December, that up till that time he could stay there, and then I don't know. I'm sure he perished. But, one day, thinking back, there came a very, very pretty woman and rang my bell. She was a shiksa that said she was his wife. And she thanked me very much for helping him, because she said in her house they would pick him up immediately and arrest him again. So she was very grateful to me. She came with maybe a 9-10-year-old girl. That was their child. So maybe she helped him a little. I really don't know. But he got me this man. Of course, I had to go into this big Nazi building. I went on a little error right in the lobby and made believe that I'm going for a little nothing, and then I sneaked up the stairway. I was afraid to go into the elevator, and my heart, I don't have to tell you, was pounding, because I was afraid if I knock on the wrong door that I might be in trouble. But the man opened the door, and he knew that what I was coming for. He said to me, "Give me the money and give me your passport and your grandma's passport. And don't forget, in those 2 passports were our visas." But my time was running out, and I had to take a chance on somebody. There comes a time when you must take a chance on somebody, and that's what I did.
Do you remember his name?
Oh, no. Then, before that yet, before I went to him, one day, you got into a habit. I used to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning and walk to the window. We lived in a big apartment building, and I would look down, and I would see Nazis dragging Jews out of the buildings. I would say to my grandmother, "Let's get dressed, so when they come, at least we'll be dressed." That one morning, they did come to our door too, and they asked for my father. When I told them that they took away my father a long time ago, they didn't believe they left me behind, and they said they will have to take me. That when my father will give himself up, they will let me go. They would always, it was a habit, when they took the men away, they would bring them to an armory and gather them there, and then they would come with trucks and ship them to the various camps. That day, they must have had about 3,000 men in that armory, and I was one female. And I was scared like unbelievable. Even though I know that every man there was a Jew, and they looked at me, I'm their daughter or their sister, but still I was very frightened. And for a smart girl, I started to talk very silly, from fright. And I started to curse Hitler. I kept saying that he wants to get rid of us Jews, and I'm all ready to leave, and now they arrested me, and I was very frightened. When a Nazi came over to me and pleaded with me that I should please be quiet, that if I be quiet and listen to him, he will get me out the same day yet. But he told me if another Nazi will overhear me, his hands will be tied and he will not be able to do nothing for me. Well, he did get me out. As a matter of fact, he came to my house one day to warn me if I don't go to the police station and unregister myself from the apartment I'm living at, they might not let me pass the border. So I did that yet too. And it must have been 2 o'clock in the morning when 2 police on motorcycles, they came and they delivered our passports. By 6 o'clock in the morning, I said to my grandmother, "Now be very, very quiet, because we have the SS people living underneath us. Try to make no noise when we go down now." We went down, but evidently he had a feeling that we're going to be leaving, because he opened his door, and as always, when there was no other people around, he was very nice. It had been December the 6th. On December the 1st, they had received rations for Christmas to buy sweets, and he gave all those rations to us along on our trip in Wichtelswell. Then we went on a train.
Do you remember what you packed and took with you when you left?
Then I packed.
When you left?
There wasn't much to pack because all our clothing, my mother knew that we were going to Poland. She packed everything, she took everything along. That she left in May, we did not leave till December. We did not have a batch of winter clothes. But when I went once to the Ayas and I begged them, they should give me a winter coat, an old one, anything. I said, not for me. I will manage, I will survive in the cold. But I wanted it for my grandmother. They asked me if I knew how to knit, and I said, of course I did. So they gave me a lot of awful looking wool, but I made all kinds of things out of it. I said to my grandmother, I will make you all warm clothing, and you will put your black spring coat over it, so no one will see what you're wearing underneath, but you will be warm. So we really did not have much luggage. There was very little that we took. A few pictures that I had left and so on, but there wasn't much. I even got nervy. There was a little jewelry, and my grandmother kept threatening me, don't give any of it to me, because I'm not risking my life for any jewelry. But I said to her, you know what? Nobody knows I'm a smart 16 years old. Make believe I'm a not so smart 16-year-old. I'm not going to hide the jewelry. I'm going to throw it into my bag loose. If they'll find it, let them take it. But I will not make believe I hid it. But I said to my grandmother when they checked our valises on the border, where we were going on a small boat to go over to Sweden, I told her that when I'm going inside to be checked bodily, I'm going to leave my pocketbook outside. She should keep an eye on it. And maybe if you're lucky, no one will look in it. And that's how it was. They did not look in it. And when I came to this country, I paid off my relatives that sent me my tickets with the jewelry. So I felt this way I would feel that I don't owe them.
Did you let your parents know that you were going to America with your mother?
Yes. The postcard that I gave you to make a copy of, my brother is writing in it. In a very short time, we received 3 letters from you. One came from Berlin telling us you're leaving. One came from Sweden, where you were taking the boat. And the third one came from the United States. He said, you cannot imagine our excitement, how we felt knowing you made it there.
You received mail from your family?
I received mail from my family. It came from the Warsaw Ghetto. Originally, when they were leaving, I had asked them that whichever one of them will write a letter, they're to mention everyone's name, so I know that they're all together. Whichever one wrote it. And they were always mentioned every name. The last 3 letters I received from the Warsaw Ghetto, the last one came December the 8th, 41. December the 7th, the war broke out, and whatever was here in the post office, they delivered. After that, we heard nothing more. But the last 3 letters, my father and my brother was not with my mother and the girls. If they were dead already, that they killed them, more likely, my opinion, knowing them, I would say they sneaked out of the ghetto and joined the partisans to fight. But of course, this is an opinion. It's not a fact. I don't know it.
Did your family describe what was happening in the ghetto?
Well, when my mother wrote, she always covered up. All she was concerned that we're all right, and please take care of Grandma and Grandma. Her whole being was that we should be all right. Don't worry, we're okay, we're okay. My brother occasionally wrote more, you know, like he said when they first came to Warsaw and they went into a hotel. He said he took 3 times to go to the bathroom in a hotel, mind you. And it was so filthy, he vomited running out each time that he couldn't go. And he only said, I'm so happy that you would never have to see the things that we're seeing here. And he was 13 years old, don't forget.
So you left Berlin in December of 1939,
Right.
and you went to Sweden by boat.
We went by a small boat to Sweden, and then in Sweden, 2 days later, we took a big boat, a Swedish boat, because originally, actually, I had bought tickets on a German boat, but when I saw once, when I was at the Hayas, the boat that they didn't let in no place all over the world, I saw the people come back. I was frightened to go on a German boat. I said to my grandmother, we are not going because I am not going to leave Germany and God forbid have to come back. I said I would kill myself on the way.
What was the trip like coming to America?
The trip was a very nice trip. It was like actually a luxury boat. They served us elegantly served foods, things that like a grapefruit was on the boat. That was my first grapefruit I ever saw in my life. Because don't forget, Germany grew certain things. They would get oranges before the war even from Israel. They said Jaffa oranges on it, but not all fruits came from overseas, you know. So certain things I didn't know about.
Were there other German refugees on the boat?
Yes. There were 2, a brother and a sister. The girl was maybe 9 and the boy 11. And the Hayas, the people from the Hayas that put them on the boat asked all of us to keep an eye on them. Their parents had both been killed in Germany, and an aunt and uncle was awaiting them in America. It was the most, I mean, we tried to keep an eye on them, but the boy was 11. He was so grown up. He was so protective of his sister. It was just unbelievable how he tried to be her mother and her father.
Do you remember their names?
No.
What was it like when your boat pulled in?
Well, my boat pulled in.
Where did you arrive in the United States?
I came to 57th Street in Manhattan, where they had the Swedish-American line. And that's where we pulled in.
Did you see the Statue of Liberty as you came into the
Yes,
harbor?
we did to see the Statue of Liberty.
What was that like for you?
It was exciting, very exciting, especially coming from Hitler's Germany. You can imagine. Like you felt that, like when you go to Israel the first time, when you get off the plane and you kiss the grounds, you feel the same way coming to America if you come from a country like Germany. At the time, of course, you know. When I got off, there was 2 of my uncles that I knew, and then there was another gentleman with them that I did not know. And it turned out to be my father's brother that my father never talked about. He was 4 years old when 2 older brothers left for America. And he didn't remember them. Maybe if he had remained in Warsaw and been with his mother and his sisters, he might have heard them talk about them, but being he moved to Germany, he never mentioned them. But of course, when I wrote to them that a brother came and picked me up, my father was very excited. He wrote thanking him because he was very good to me. Anything I wanted, he bought me.
What was his
He
name?
had 3 sons, he never had a daughter.
What was your uncle's name?
Max Rosenbaum.
And the name of the other uncles?
You're going to laugh now, the other uncle. I was 4 years in America when this uncle one day came and said to me, come, I want to take you someplace. Didn't tell me anything and took me 4 years later to this other uncle. That other uncle was so excited. You cannot visualize it. He had, as a young man, an automobile accident and was crippled for life. He was married and had a wife and never had children. So seeing me there, I cannot begin to tell you. He was totally crippled from the waist down, yet he had a sewing machine in the house, and he originally also was a tailor, and he bought all kinds of fancy materials by hand, leading the machine because he couldn't use his feet. He made me several dresses. Like, it was just unbelievable.
What was his name?
His name was Mendel.
I think we'll take a tape break now. Today is February 24th, 1997. The survivor is Frida Reich, and this is tape 3. How did you learn to speak English?
I went to night school the second day I was in America. And don't forget, it was during wartime. I mean, not here in America yet, but it was considered wartime. So everybody threatened me, if I'll speak German, they'll send me back to Germany. So they forced me into speaking, and I never spoke Yiddish, and I did learn Yiddish from a man that I met 57 years ago that lives right here in this condo.
And what's his name?
His name is Maury Berk, B-E-R-K. Originally, when I met him, his name was Berkowitz, but he changed it to Berk.
How did you meet your husband?
One of my girlfriends that I met in night school went with his brother. And actually we met in the Prospect Park. There was a concert, and I was with a boy there, and I took her along because she was a very not a popular girl, and I always felt sorry for her, even though she came from a very, very wealthy family. But her mother made a maid out of her. She only wanted to be the prima donna, not her daughter. So I took her along, and she met in the Prospect Park Ernie's brother. But she was afraid to go with him when he wanted to take her home, so she said, you come with me. Well, he didn't like very much to take out two girls. So he says, oh, my brother must be here in the park someplace. He brought Ernie over, and they never saw each other again, but Ernie asked me to meet him the next day to go to the beach. And from the beach, in my bathing suit with a little house dress over it, he took me to his parents' house. And they were very delighted, because I spoke German to them, and they were elderly people. They had come yet after I came here. So they were very nice to me. As a matter of fact, when Ernie went into the service, into the American Army, they kept the youngest brother sending him to me to take me out and take me here and take me there. They didn't want me to find somebody else to marry. So they kept me busy.
When were you and Ernie married?
We were married March the 17th, 1946. He came home beginning of February 1946, and we took about 6 weeks we got married.
Where were you married?
We were married in Brooklyn in a very Orthodox shul. You have to remember my grandmother was still alive, and she was very Orthodox, you know, where they walked around me 7 times, and we had to break the glass and everything. And surprisingly, somebody that came from Ernie's hometown that had married a very religious man, the minute he saw the type of wedding I was having, he offered that he wanted to sign the marriage certificate. He wanted to be a witness.
Tell me about your children.
My children are, I have 3 wonderful, wonderful children. I always, all the years they were growing up, I always talked about myself. I always talked about my family. I wanted them to know what happened to me. And whenever they went to school and had to write an essay, they would always say to me, "Mommy, we wrote something that you told us, and we always had the best essay in class." And my grandchildren followed suit. They did the same thing. They would come to me, and they would ask me questions, and they would always get extra credit for writing something that was real, you know, not a fantasy.
What are your children's names?
My oldest daughter is Jeanette. She's married to Jerry Katz, so her name is Jeanette Katz now. Linda, her name is Linda Gordon. Renee is married to Stuart Sachs. She lives in California, where the other 2 live here near me. And they each have 2 boys. Surprisingly, I had the 3 girls, and they had each 2 boys. But all my grandchildren were born RH positive, I think. Because Ernie's parents, you see, his mother came from a very wealthy family. And you know, the wealthy people had a habit. They didn't want their money to go out of the family, but they would take a poor cousin in the family and marry him off to the rich girl. So they were first cousins. So we have, my children inherited that you know, they had to take the blood out and replace it, you know. All my 6 grandchildren was born that way.
Do you believe in God?
I do. I realize that, just to be honest with you, a lot of people, and I'm talking now people that actually remained in Germany, in camps and everything, don't believe in God anymore. But I always believed. I brought up my children that way. When they were little, I had 3 little girls, and I sent all 3 of them to yeshivas. They were where they had to wear long sleeves and everything. But it only rubbed off on my oldest. She's the only shul goer in the family.
Do you often think about the Holocaust?
I remember when, I never forget, like today is a birthday from one of them. I'll always say, "Oh gee, today my sister would have been so and so old." And I've never forgot. I've always talked of them. I did not want to forget. You see, I have one girlfriend. She's here in America, and she wrote in my album, and she lost, like me, her whole family, but she could not live with it. She could not survive remembering that she had a family that was killed. She put a mental block across her mind. She don't remember anything that happened in Germany. She married an Italian fella. She became a devout Catholic, had 3 children, and is very happy. But she don't remember, and I'm friendly with her first cousin, who warned me that she had originally lived in the same neighborhood as me. She told me, if you ever see her, don't acknowledge. She will not acknowledge you.
Have you ever returned to Berlin? Have you ever gone back to Berlin?
I have never gone back to Berlin. I only went back to his hometown, and I went with him. I tell you the truth, they gave you an option when you came from a city that they would sponsor you, pay all your expenses, and take you back to Berlin, but Ernie wouldn't let me go.
Why did you decide to make this tape and to tell your story now?
I decided it not for myself, only for my lost family. I want them to be remembered, every single one of them. I want them, that's why I put their names on the Holocaust Memorial in Miami. I wanted each name engraved. I saw some people put, like, say, family Rosenbaum. I didn't want them. I wanted every name on there. I told my husband at the time, don't forget, I have no gravestone to go to, and as far as I'm concerned, there isn't any place that knows that they were ever on this earth. Where this way, it gives me something to think about, that they were here once.
What is your most painful memory of the Holocaust?
Well, the first months that I was in America were very difficult. And many a times, thinking of them and receiving mail from them, and knowing where they were, especially once they were in the Getty, I kept saying, I should have not been selfish, even though I did it to bring my grandmother here, but I felt a little selfish that I saved myself, that I didn't stay and dine with them.
If you could leave a message for your children and for your grandchildren and for future generations, what would that message be?
I would leave the message that they should never forget. Thank God my children were very good to me. They named their children after my family. I named my children after family. And I remember a cousin of mine living in New York, and she has a business there, came across a young man that came from Uruguay and did business with her. And she said to him, you know, you remind me of my cousin. And she asked him, what's your name? And he said Rosenbaum, but written with a C, like the Polish people write. She got all excited. His name, being he was from a South American country, was Maurice. So she talked herself into it, that he might be my brother Gabriel's son, and that he was given the name after my father, whose name was Michael, Maurice. So she got all excited, she got me all excited, and my little grandson was named Gabriel. He got so excited. He would call me every day from school. I said, where are you? Aren't you in school? Oh yes, I went into the principal's office and requested if I could use the telephone. She asked me what for, and when I explained it to her, she said, by all means call your grandma. He would always, and then he would say, oh my God, if he's alive, I'm named after him. He's supposed to be dead. But nothing came of it. Because he had a living father who was at the time in Europe, and of course it was not my brother. It was just a coincidence.
Is there anything that you would like to add before we end?
I really don't know. I just, like I say, I know that my children and my grandchildren will always remember, because I talked about it enough for them never to forget. My youngest daughter, who's an invalid, I believe tried to write a book about my life. But of course she's not an author and she don't have connections, so of course it's hard for her to sell it. But she did, every time I came there, she would always take notes, ask me questions and take notes down. When I talked about it, she would always say, "Ma, talk into a video. I want to have it." Just a tape recorder even, you know, because she says, "I don't want to forget." She more than the other children. Being she's an invalid and she's all alone in the house for many hours of the day, so she is, you know, a little bit more emotional about those things. She was very excited when she heard I'm going to make this video.
I'd like to thank you very, very much for telling us your story and for being with us
Thank
today.
you for coming.
Mrs. Reich, would you please introduce this very good-looking gentleman who's sitting
This
next
is
to
my
you?
husband, whom I'm married to next month, 51 years. And I would say happy years, even though the early ones were struggling years, but we were always did for each other, he for me and I for him. And he helped with the children when they were little. So we had a fairly good life.
Thank you. Mr. Reich, are you also a survivor?
Well, I came to the United States in 1938. I still had my parents living in Germany, and my two younger brothers. But for me, it was the connection was so much easier because I had relatives here in this country, and I had my sisters, two sisters, and brother in this country. My brother came in 1923. So I had, being that I had a good connection, so I got out without having any problems.
Is there anything that you would like to tell us about your wife?
Well, you know, I'm very happy that my wife had this. She always talked about her parents, her sisters, her brothers, and I guess that's what she wanted. She wanted that, being that she don't know where they got killed, and I'm sure she don't want to know how they got killed. I mean, you know what happened during the war, and I'm sure there's many, many other families that were affected. You all know it. And I don't think that they know exactly how many millions of Jewish people got killed. I don't think they will ever find out. So, in a way, I'm glad that this is behind. Being my wife, always wanted this to be known. And I think she's a very clever lady, my wife. In every respect, you know. And I always try to tell her, you know, she shouldn't always, because it's very emotional for me. I think that I get more emotional than my wife is, you know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Because everybody has a different, you know, personality. Everybody has a different outlook in life. So I'm glad that this is behind. That she, you know, she always wanted that.
Thank you very, very much. Would you please tell me who's in this picture?
On one side is my mother, on the other side is my father. Then we are three girls. The center one is myself. On the left is my little sister Elizabeth. The one that's sitting in front of my uncle, who's my mother's brother, is Brigitta, and my brother Gabriel, all the way in the front.
And what was your uncle's name?
My uncle's name was Hermann Wipplisch.
And where was this taken?
This was taken in Berlin, Germany,
And when?
approximately 1931, I would say offhand.
Thank you.
Would you please tell me who's in this picture?
This picture is my mother's mother, my grandmother, and a first cousin of mine. It must have been taken either in late 38 or early 39, I would say offhand. This cousin of mine remained in Germany. She perished with two little girls that she had.
Do you know her name?
Her name was Gerda Haber, Haber.
And this picture was taken where?
It was taken on the streets of Berlin in front of a bar.
Thank you. Would you tell me about this picture?
This picture is a picture of me at school in my classroom. The one in the center is myself, and I would say it was taken approximately in 1929, possibly,
And where?
in the school that I went to, a public school
In Berlin?
in Berlin, Germany.
Thank you. Would you please tell me about this picture?
This picture is of my brother Gabriel and my baby sister Molly, and I would say it was taken probably in the early part of 39, before they went away.
Thank you. Would you please tell me about this document?
This is my Polish passport that I came with to the United States.
Thank you. Would you tell me about this document?
This is part of my passport. The page where they made a stamp before I crossed the border to leave Germany.
Thank you.
Look like this.
Would you please tell me about this document?
This is a postcard that was sent to me when I first came to United States by my brother. telling me how excited he was when he received 3 letters from me, one on top of the other. One came from Berlin, Germany, telling him, don't write me here no more, I'm leaving. The second one came from Sweden, where I took a boat, and the third one came from the United States.
Thank you.
Writing is really on the other side.
Would you tell me who's in this picture?
There is myself and Ernie, my husband, of course, and there's my daughter Jeanette and our husband Jerry Katz.
Thank you. Would you please tell me who's in this picture?
Ernie and myself, and my daughter Linda and Dennis.
And their last name?
Gordon.
Thank you. Would you please tell me who's in this picture?
First there's Ernie and myself. Next to me is my daughter Renee and our husband Stuart Sachs. In front of them the boys Aaron and Lenny.
Thank you. Would you please tell me who's in this photograph?
They're my 3 grandsons. The 2 on each end are my older daughters, Harvey and Mark Katz. The middle one is Gabriel Gordon.
Thank you. Would you please tell me who's in this picture?
This picture is of my grandson by Linda. His name is Jason Gordon.
Thank you.
Harvey just was in New York.